Yeah, okay. Well, thanks everybody for inviting me to speak in Sheffield. I don't know how many people know an awful lot about me. I used to work for South Yorkshire Police. I worked for 17 years. Before I got booted out 3 years ago as the principal intelligence analyst. Prior to that, I worked for Sheffield City Council, where I was a general manager in Environmental Health and Trading Standards Department, reporting directly to David Pershing, who was the director of that department at the time of, say, the Hillsborough disaster. And I studied in Sheffield as well. So most of my adult life has been in Sheffield. I've been away from Sheffield of late, but I've suddenly returned to Sheffield for stage 2 of my stance. The format of my presentation tonight will be in 4 general parts. I want to just briefly tell you a little bit about the nature of the stance in the police 2 or 3 years ago that got me the sack. Now, some of you will know a little bit more about that. Some of you perhaps it's new to, but I'm not going to go into it in great detail because you can go on the Farrell Report website and find out various videos that document that particular episode in the journey against this stance against police corruption. The second part will be a case study that I've been involved in down in London that exposes police corruption, and it's a fascinating case study, one that I've stuck by and worked with, and it's come back to Sheffield and is currently in the hands of South Yorkshire Police. Wishful thinking that they may attempt to do anything with it, but nevertheless, there is method in my madness as will become unfolding throughout this presentation. Third part of the presentation, since I was booted out, became known to the Truth Movement, I've took my case through the courts and have met some interesting characters in the Truth Movement. I spent most of my time down in London, I've been over in Ireland, and there's a few characters that I want to refer to as the third part of this case study, because one in particular is very important and links back to Sheffield. Sheffield's very important in tonight's presentation. And finally, the fourth part of this presentation concerns the last part of my stance, which really takes effect in a few days' time, where the Chief Constable of South Yorkshire Police is being put on the spot. He's going to have to arrest me, or he's going to have to arrest a judge, but he hasn't really got an awful lot of option to do anything other than enforce some law enforcement action either against me or against the judge. And I'll document exactly why I've deliberately and willfully positioned myself to be in that predicament. I could be facing a prison sentence in the fullness of time, but I'm prepared because I want to try and expose the corruption. And it's high time that officers in South Yorkshire Police manned up the corruption that's within. So, the first part of the presentation, that was me 2 or 3 years ago. 3 years ago, 3.5 years ago, I was happy as Larry in South Yorkshire Police as the principal intelligence analyst. A nice job, never a dull moment. But all of a sudden, I was pigeonholed, and I woke up to what was going on somewhat by it dawned on me that things like 9/11 and 7/7 were not perpetrated by 23 Muslim suicidal maniacs, but those acts of terror were orchestrated by agents of the state, both in the CIA and Mossad in America, 9/11, and in the United Kingdom, sadly, by MI5 involvement, helped by the Metropolitan Police, and I dare say, to some degree, by South Yorkshire Police as well, and forces above South Yorkshire Police, such as West Yorkshire Police. I didn't wake up to that until 2 days before an assignment. That assignment was to assess terror threat. I was expected to go along with the normal police rhetoric and say that the threat comes from Islamic extremism. But when I woke up 2 days before the assignment was due, I had a crisis of conscience and decided I couldn't bear false witness, and therefore at that point in time I decided not to try and skirt around the issue, but to confront it head on, even though it was tantamount to committing professional career suicide. So I knew what I was doing. I knew that if I made a stance, created waves, it would probably end up in getting rid of sack. The Chief Constable at the time, Meredith Hughes, and it seems to have...
Just click on anywhere outside of that. Anywhere outside of it, it'll go away. There you go.
Okay, that's better. So, I don't want to really go into too much detail as to what happened when I got the sack. Other presentations have covered it in more detail. Since I got chucked out of the police force, I've done my level best to shout from the rooftops as best I can within my own limited ability. So I have been giving interviews to share my experiences and share my thoughts on the aggressive foreign policy and the terror threat and the bogus war on terror. But there's me on the top of the Froggatt Edge with a megaphone in hand. And you can get that on some of the short videos that I've done to try and expose corruption within South Yorkshire Police. So shouting from the rooftops in the best way possible in the hope of waking people up. The senior command team that sacked me, most of them are still there today, other than the top two. Meredith Hughes and Bob Dyson have long since left, and the current Chief Constable is David Crompton. There will be quite a bit of focus on the police in this presentation. The day I was dismissed was on the 2nd of September 2010. And in my witness statement, I didn't hold back. I knew I was going to get the sack. No punches pulled. They're sacking the wrong Tony. And the right Tony. The Tony the police service should have been gunning for was none other than Tony Blair. They acknowledged that. They didn't say it was wrong. They simply said, it's an incompatible belief. You and I are just the government foot soldiers, Tony. You'll never get them to tell the truth. So they weren't actually saying I was wrong. And to be fair to South Yorkshire Police, they were quite complimentary in dismissing me. They didn't really try and ridicule me. They did what they felt was necessary to oust me out of the organisation, given that I was becoming a loose cannon and they couldn't have somebody with these views so passionately determined to talk about these views in open. But when it comes to integrity in the moment of choice, I only had 2 days to respond before I woke up. And in that time, you go through it, because I didn't want to throw a police career away of 17 years. And it could have been so easy to find a way of skirting around the issue. But I saw what was happening with 9/11 and 7/7 in a wider strategic context. I saw it as what this country was doing by way of an overseas foreign policy agenda, where we were demonising Muslims, where we were aggressively in the Middle East under false pretenses, where innocent women and children and men were being slaughtered, and that it was all deceitful. So the thought of trying to skirt around the issue, I did contemplate it, but my conscience wouldn't allow that. So I had to do whatever I could. Now, the way I came at this was more, in a way, looking at the New World Order. This was just a pastime rather than work that I was doing in the police. So I came from it, from looking from Bible scripture, from looking at various documents that talked about the Antichrist and understanding of the New World Order agenda. So that was where I came from, rather than as an analyst looking at the intelligence sources to me available in the police. And so it was by accident that I dropped on 9/11. And my strategic threat assessment, if I hadn't been enabled to produce one, would have said that the threat comes not so much from Islamic extremism, but rather internal tyranny and a new world satanic agenda. Now, whichever entity you decide is at the top of the tree, I've used an exhibit there that firmly sits Queen Elizabeth II at the top of the pyramid. And more on her later. But most certainly, I didn't see the threat coming from Islamic terrorism. And I asked my boss to show me proofs. And none was forthcoming. They simply said, just Tony, don't rock the boat. So the whole bogus terror threat was a shambles to me. And this film, I don't know whether anybody's seen it, again it's a satire. It was a satire made in Sheffield. And it stereotypes Muslims in a way that is helping dupe the masses into believing that there is a terror threat and that there are radical Muslims out there hell-bent on doing crazy things. Well, if there are radicals out there wanting to attack our nation, well, I think it's merited because of our aggressive overseas foreign policy agenda and what we do. But the whole construct was bogus in my mind. And it was like a paradigm shift overnight that I saw that. And therefore I had to take action. It was incumbent on me to adhere to professional standards for honesty and integrity. When I got kicked out, I did appeal. I took it to the police authority. And from having a view from the police that my views were correct and that I'd had an outstanding record, all of a sudden, in front of the chair of the police authority, Reg Littleboy, my views were outlandish. Even though the police were not saying that, the police were saying my views could be correct. So it was beginning to twist. And then, lo and behold, when I did come out in the Truth Movement, a year later, it was the Sun that picked up on me and run with articles to ridicule me. Coming to my defence was Dr. Rory Ridley-Duff, who wrote an article on whatever happened on 7/7 Canary Wharf. So he had a pop back at the Sun. But the Sun has got an incredible record. And I've been in cahoots before with South Yorkshire Police in order to tell lies that stood for 25 years over Hillsborough. And that only in recent times has become exposed for what it really is. But while we're on the subject of Hillsborough, one thing that remains covered up is that Assistant Chief Constable Walter Jackson was in the control room on the day of Hillsborough. Nowhere is this recorded in any of the statements. But he was a gibbering wreck underneath the table, pissed as a fart because he'd been director's box, made his way over when he saw the horror unfolding at Leppings Lane End. And then, when he saw the horror unfold on the CCTV in the control room, he crumbled, worse for alcohol. That ain't so bad, were it not for the fact that that fact has been covered up for 25 years. Nothing has ever come out. The beans were spilled in 2009, 2010, when the press officer shared that story to me. Press officer Andy Hymas was in the ground on the day, and he was the person that was told to make his way to the control room to find out what the fucking hell was going on, because all hell was breaking loose. And they wouldn't let this young press officer inside for the simple reason because South Yorkshire Police were more interested in protecting the reputation of one of their most senior ranking officers. In fact, the most senior ranking officer of the day. That's a story that's true. I've got no reason to believe that Andy Hymas fabricated any of that. He had no reason to. The difficulty is with that kind of story is that even the Liverpool Echo, when it broke and I tried to whistleblow on that story, the extent of media control was such that the Echo refused to run with it.
The Liverpool Echo?
That story was corroborated, the Liverpool Echo. That story was rather corroborated by David Pidcock, who's unfortunately not here tonight, but David would I'm sure, share this story about a local BBC reporter called Winston Cooper, who rung him up close to Hillsborough afterwards and actually told him a story about Walter Jackson, the ACC, that corroborated with Andy Hymas' story to me. Winston Cooper, a local BBC radio reporter, was murdered On the 15th of April 2011, in the south of France, Winston Cooper was potentially a whistleblower that was going to blow open what really happened at Hillsborough and why Hillsborough had to be covered up. It will come out. I have put in statements, I've put it into the IPCC, the Independent Police Complaints Commission, have contacted me to verify the story and telling you.
Sorry, Tony, could I just, I don't want to be pedantic or anything, but you know when you say, are you talking about Winton Cooper?
Winton Cooper.
Winton,
yeah.
Not Winston.
Winton Cooper.
I just wanted
yeah, it's Winton Cooper,
Winton.
a former local BBC radio reporter. So there was something very sinister going on, and the highest ranking officer in the stadium that day did things that were covered up for 25 years. Even now, I'm not convinced that any of that will come out. But they have got a problem in me with the fact that I've put statements in to that effect. And they know they blurt things out, and I don't hold any fear in order to do that. So, a year, Meredith Hughes retired the Chief Constable exactly the same year, the same day that basically I became known to the Truth Movement by appearing on alternative media, getting on the Alex Jones show, getting on Richard D. Hall, as a whistleblower. Now, I wasn't a whistleblower in a classical sense, but at least there was somebody that stood up when I saw wrong. My case went all the way to the Employment Appeal Tribunal in London and then to the Royal Court of Justice. Who knows this lady? Anybody? She's the one that shut my case down, Lady Dame Janet Smith, saying I wasn't genuine. Something which ran contrary to everything the police had ever said about me. Lady Janet Smith is the judge now presiding over the Jimmy Savile affair. So I'm not quite sure we're going to get to the bottom of the level of paedophilia in the UK and that has been covered up by the BBC when some judge as corrupt as that is presiding over that important case. So Lady Dame Janet Smith, one to look out for as Jimmy Savile case unfolds. So I don't really want to say too much more about my time with South Yorkshire Police, but I want to come on subsequent to that what's been happening. Because it's been quite an incredible journey for me. Now, a photograph there, in a way, is very prophetic for me. At the time that was taken, I didn't know any of those people. Does anybody know any of those people?
John Hill.
John Anthony Hill. Okay, yeah. A part of this presentation is going to be a little bit about the John Anthony Hill story. But a few characters there is, from left to right, Dr. Nick Collison, 7-7 Beneath the Veil, he authored that book, and also featured in a satire, Collison and Farrell are dead. Belinda Mackenzie is a campaigner that's been very supported down in London for me. Campaigns on the Holly Gregg case. In the middle is John Anthony Hill, goes by the name of Muad'Dib. Muad'Dib is the filmmaker of 7-7 Ripple Effect, one of the first films that influenced me in shaping my views on the London bombings. Muad'Dib also made a film called Ripple Effect Nazi Banksters. He's also made a film on an edited version of Unlawful Killing, that's the killing of Princess Diana and Elizabeth to go. His target, make no mistake, is the sovereignty. More about that later. To the right of Muad'Dib it used to be a friend called Mark Windows, who was in the Truth Movement, prominent in the Kent Freedom Movement, prominent in the 9/11 Keep Talking group. I'm utterly convinced he's a COINTELPRO. But I won't want to say too much more on that. The far right is a lady called Miss Charles Seven, and she has got a fascinating case, a dangerous case for the establishment. And I want to share my experience of being an author of a report that has covered her case. Because her case, in some shape or form, lends quite a bit of clue as to what was going on in the build-up for 7/7 and who may have been involved in the perpetration of the 7/7 acts. But the beauty of her case is that we have got the evidence that exposes the utter corruption in the courtroom in the Royal Court of Justice. And it's a case that involves at least 4 people have been whacked, I believe, to keep the lid on her case. Such is the danger her case holds to the establishment. So those Constable and Farrell are dead. It's a satire I did on the 7/7, expose it. If anybody's not seen that, it's only a 40-minute satire, but it exposes who really should be fingered for 7/7. So I'd encourage you to go on YouTube and actually watch 7/7 Colostrum and Farrell Are Dead as a satire. But I'm not here to talk about that. I'm here to talk about the case of Miss Charlie 7. I met her outside the Independent Police Complaints Commission on the 234th anniversary of the Illuminati's birthday in 1776, on the 1st of May. She picked the microphone up in her hand, and I just spoke for 2 minutes before that, saying about my experience in South Yorkshire Police, when she comes up and boldly claims she knew what was going on before 7/7 happened. And I looked at her and I thought, what? Nah. But she said it with passion, and she said it with such tour de force that I felt I needed to find out a little bit more what this lady was on about. So that was me at the same day, in my Surrey and Blair Ace of Clubs smoking gun t-shirt. So I stuck with Miss 7. I went down to London and I spent 6 months studying her case. Now, a quick resume of her case. She was into concepts in TV. She was a bit of an innovator. So she went to a law firm back in 2003 with a whole series of programs, TV programs, by way of concepts, in order to protect and patent. The kind of programs, well, you and I certainly wouldn't be terribly enamoured with. But programs like You Are What You Eat, 10 Years Younger, Dancing on Ice, even Strictly Come Dancing in its current format with the celebrities and the judges, was her idea. The story of The Walk, an ITV series, was a script that she had made, and she had a fantastic portfolio that she took to the lawyers in 2003. The lawyers breached confidence and put her in touch with media moguls up in Scottish TV, a guy called Jim Manson and a lady called Lady Helen Murray Alexander. And before she knew it, she had these concepts stolen from her and appearing on mainstream channels within a matter of a few short months. The solicitors dried up, wouldn't talk to her. So she took the establishment and the law firm on. She went to a different law firm who did the same thing, and a second tranche of intellectual property theft was stolen from her. She didn't lie down, she fought tooth and nail. But as a result of her determination to fight the system, she became gang-stalked. And in the lead-up to July 2005, when the 7/7 bombings occurred, gang-stalking of her, in order to keep her case out of the Royal Court of Justice, reached its height. To her, the media mogul firms, NTL, Virgin Media, Scottish TV, would advertise in hidden in plain sight that something dreadful was about to happen in July 2007 in London on the Underground. She was so convinced in her own mind that this was what was being advertised that she went to the court and to the police to cry, something needs to be done. These maniacs are going to do something dreadful. Now, none of this would actually hold up in evidence, but nevertheless, she did go to the police, alerted them to the prospect of something dreadful happening. Lo and behold, something dreadful did happen. Not before she was hidden away, barricaded inside her own flat, because the extent of gang stalking was life-threatening and almost daily. When 7/7 happened, her case that was scheduled for the Royal Court of Justice was in August 2005, got stayed until she came out of hiding and eventually managed to get her case back on track into the Royal Court of Justice in 2006. But not before she'd encountered all sorts of skullduggery by the defendants' barristers. There were 10 defendants, big players: Scottish TV, Virgin Media, Bindman's law firm down in London, and a whole host of other lawyers. And she, before a judge called Judge Pumphrey, won her case in as much as this case now, against the 10 defendants, was going to be heading for a criminal trial. There was definitely copyright infringement and breach of contract. The judge could be heard saying all of this, Judge Pumphrey. What transpired after the case got closed down, the case ended after 3 days, was that Miss Seven expected a court order to confirm what the judge had said in the hearing. She was entitled to costs because most of these defendants didn't put up any defence to her affidavits in her case. And the judge could be heard on record saying that in all the time he'd seen a witness, that this evidence brought before him was the best evidence he'd seen by far by a litigant in person. And that on a scale of truth, he had absolutely no doubt whatsoever that the reasons why Miss Seven went into hiding throughout the month of June and July 2005 was exactly as specified. All that is on audio tape. Pumphrey believed her. Pumphrey knew what was going on. Pumphrey was going to, at that point, award her the case, and this was going to be heading to a criminal trial, which would bring down organisations like Virgin Media, Scottish TV. It was that serious, and would shame the BBC. For programmes that you and I may not value, but people in the nation love on a Saturday night watching their beloved Strictly Come Dancing. So no matter what you think about that particular type of programme, half the nation love it dearly. She never got a penny. A court order came out completely the opposite, polarised from the actual event of the hearing itself. There was no merit in Miss Seven's case, which was the exact opposite of what the judge had said. Pumphrey, the judge, was nowhere to be seen. Seven couldn't get hold of Pumphrey for love nor money. Chased him up for 12 months. Meanwhile, Pumphrey got promoted to the Court of Appeal. Pumphrey got knighted. All the time he stayed silent about this case. Pumphrey was only 54 when he got knighted in November 2007. He then got promoted to the Court of Appeal, and in his first case, Intermedia versus Nokia, a high intellectual property, a big case. When that ended, it was Christmas Eve. Christmas Eve 2010, Pumphrey was found dead alone in his flat, supposedly died of a stroke. Previous judges had tried to help Miss Seven, and one of the judges, Judge Warren, released the audio transcripts of the earlier Pumphrey hearing, which was the incriminating hearing. And this is the reason why I've stuck with Miss Seven's case, because the audio tapes of Miss Seven's case are absolute dynamite in exposing the corruption within the Royal Court of Justice. And it's for that reason, and that reason alone, that I decided that I had to stay with this case, because it was absolute dynamite. And subsequently, Miss Seven got her case in 2008 in front of Lord Justice Lawrence Blackburn, Lord Justice Lawrence Collins, sorry. And Collins was a jumped-up solicitor who made promotion that year unrivaled, unparalleled in all the judiciary. From a low lawyer, he'd gone right up into the House of Lords and further. He'd been knighted too. And he closed the case down in 2008 without allowing Miss Seven to refer to anything that had happened in the earlier Pumphrey hearing. including showing and having heard the audio tapes, which was so incriminating and could have brought down the Royal Court of Justice. So he shut that case up. Miss Seven never let go. 65 times she's been to the Metropolitan Police Service with complaints of one kind or another. She has undoubtedly been gang-stalked. She continues to be gang-stalked. When I was writing with her report, I had access to all her court bundles. I had to stay in her apartment flat in Westbourne in London in order to have access to the necessary files to enable me to do my job. While I was doing that, across the apartment, across the road was a hotel, above which was a corridor where 6 windows, the length and breadth of the road, were all zoomed in on North Kitchen, overtly watching everything that was going on. They weren't trying to covertly watch me, they were trying to scare me off. And when I blurted this out on the UK column on the 31st of January last year, a week later, we blurted it out about the surveillance operation across the road from Miss Seven's kitchen. And we showed Brian Gerrish exactly what was going on. Brian Gerrish, good enough for him, he put out a big plea to Sir Bernard Ogenhow, who's a Sheffield-based, former Sheffield commander, that if anything should happen to Miss Seven, then we'll hold you accountable. A week after they'd been stalking me, overtly watching everything that was doing in that flat while I was writing up the report with the files, the whole thing, the whole floor, 125 firemen and 25 fire engines, the whole floor was burnt to the ground. At the same day that adverts went out all over London about the new play called Burn the Floor. Burn the Floor was about Strictly Come Dancing, the very concept that Miss Seven, there's some of the, I'll just go, Strictly Come Dancing was her original concept. This was just one example of the kind of evil way they were taunting Miss Seven. This was an exquisite torment that she'd endured for a decade, and it was continuing. And I was then, now, having aligned myself with her case, was seeing it firsthand. The extent to which they were trying to skirt me off. And when I used to walk around in Paddington and Bayswater and go for a walk around the Serpentine, I'd be followed while I was at Miss Seven's cat's work. And dare leave the flat because it had been burgled umpteen times. And whenever the Metropolitan Police came to investigate, they were totally incompetent, or rather than incompetent, they were complicit in the cover-up of what was happening to Miss Seven. All that is well documented in a report I put out shortly after I went on the UK column with Miss Seven's case. Now, why does she say that it links with 7-7? Well, it's a little bit obscure, and I don't want to go into too much detail because the strength of her case doesn't rest on that. But this individual, I'll just show you this. The Wachowski brothers who did The Matrix and V for Vendetta, right? They've been in a lawsuit case by Sophia Stewart, and who was in this case in 2005. She was talking to Miss Seven regularly because they both endured the same kind of gang stalking as a result of their intellectual property being stolen from them. She was the author of The Matrix originally. And when V for Vendetta was advertised in June 2005 as coming out, and V for Vendetta is about using underground trains to blow up Westminster, Miss Seven, in her own way, idiosyncratic way, saw something in it that alerted her that they're going to do something on the underground and know it. Now, the police, you can understand the police being a bit cynical about anything like that. However, it's a fact that she did it, and that she at least had convinced herself that something awful was going to happen. There were other clues that they were leaving, these companies that had stalked her. So it wasn't that, but that was one of the big ones that, in her own mind, and she's no dimwit, she could see what these were doing, these media moguls. And bear in mind, you look at Panorama in 2004, advertising exactly what they were going to do on 7/7. The media, BBC, are involved. And I mean, BBC is synonymous with MI5 at various levels. right? And to pull it all off, there would have been elements in the media that would have been involved in the perpetration. And you look at how the BBC have run programmes, not just like Panorama, but BBC Generation Jihad, the 7/7 Conspiracy Files. BBC, in my mind, are every bit as complicit as the London bombings as somebody like Peter Power, a former senior detective from the Metropolitan Police who run terror drills on the same day that transpired at the exact same locations where the bombs went off. So Miss Seven, bless her, saw it for what it was. And this guy, this is an example. He was big linked with Scottish TV. Jim Manson. Jim Manson was first on the scene. Remember the Glasgow airport attacks of 2009?
Yeah.
Who should be first on the scene as the witness? Only this media mogul, Jim Manson. Jim Manson was the first person to meet Seven and steal a work from her. He's the witness on the scene. That day, in December 2009, scheduled on Scottish TV and ITV was Die Hard 2. What's Die Hard 2 about? They had to pull it. But Die Hard 2 is about a terrorist attack at an airport. Is this kind of predictive programming? But Jim Manson is almost certainly an MI5 agent, working in the media at high levels of sales programming, but can pull lots of strings. Miss Seven's case, that's just an example of the fire engines. This is the flat that I was working opposite. That whole corridor was devoted to watching Miss Seven's kitchen when I was working. And they're the judges and the barristers that stand most accused in Miss Seven's case. The people in Miss Seven's case have been promoted beyond recognition. I mentioned the judge, but the bottom in the middle, Tamsin Allen, was the second lawyer that she went to. Tamsin Allen is a super lawyer in London now. She was co-opted to the Leveson inquiry. Tamsin Allen, she's got evidence that completely nails Tamsin Allen as having stolen her work and perverted the course of justice in the Royal Court of Justice. Yet she gets promoted for her sins to quite high levels. She's a super lawyer, Leveson inquiry. This is the reward they get for being part of the corrupt establishment. Miss Seven's case, though, subsequently, a brave lass who stood against these people. Now, that photograph shows the judges. Judge Pumphrey, the bigger one on the left, is the one that's died. But I just want to mention here the one on the far right, Sir Peter Gibson. Because prior to Judge, the judges weren't all bad. And Sir Peter Gibson sided with Miss Seven's case. Now, Mr. Peter Gibson's been in the news, he's retired now. But last week, Sir Peter Gibson had studied, come out of retirement to look at documents related to the rendition issue in Guantanamo Bay, and had concluded in a report that the government have got a case to answer for. Now, that is serious stuff. Rendition, think back to Greater Manchester Police, the Chief Constable, a few years ago, Michael Todd, found at the bottom of Snowdon. His act portfolio was prevent, contest, the counter-terrorism strategy, and that he was exposing rendition for what it was at the time, when everybody else was in denial. And that he supposedly was found dead at the foot of Snowdon, having had an affair and possibly committed suicide, and that's what it was deemed to be. But he made an awful lot of enemies in the high places because of his willingness and discontent with seeing the corruption within, and the corruption within our government and top politicians regarding the rendition issues. For his sins, probably much the same as what Robin Cook. He was found at Snowdon, and it was, in his case, in Michael Todd's case, like Dr. Kelly, suicide. So Peter Gibson coming out this last month with the rendition revelations presents a little bit of an opportunity to link it with other wider things. I've sent this information all about rendition, all about Peter Gibson, all about the death of Michael Todd to David Crompton, the Chief Constable of South Yorkshire Police. I actually got a reply from him. He thanked me for sending me the information and wished me well in the new year. But that doesn't mean anything. I'm not sort of counting my chickens yet that he's going to do anything with the information I've supplied with him. Now, I provided this 240-page report to South Yorkshire Police. We handed it in this July with 7 up in Sheffield. We handed it into South Yorkshire Police for the simple reason that we daren't hand it into the Metropolitan Police because 65 occasions 7 had tried to do something and get help from the Metropolitan Police and had failed to get any help whatsoever. So my method was because the other police force that's a pariah is South Yorkshire Police over the Hillsborough disaster. And that if any force needs to redeem themselves, then it's that force. And my report hands it to them on a platter. They have enough information evidentially to arrest judges, arrest lawyers, and even arrest former police officers from the Metropolitan Police, because we cannot possibly expect the Metropolitan Police to do their own thing. Now, with the backs against the wall, there's an outside, and I say outside chance that South Yorkshire Police might want to redeem themselves because they're going to be scapegoated, hung out to dry over the Hillsborough this next year. And if they've got an ounce of goodness in themselves, they may choose, to do something with the kind of information I've been given. Now, I've involved the police commissioner, and I've handed over a 77-page report with 7 different issues. Complaints about David Crompton, the Chief Constable, documented to the Police Complaints Commissioner, the new one, Sean Wright, in a hope that they will do something. The usual response, and Martin will verify it in the break time, I'm sure, you're getting nowhere. But at least I am in a dialogue at the moment with David Crompton. And I'm going to be explaining a little bit in the 4th part of my presentation, just exactly why I'm going to make it life difficult for them, because they're going to have to arrest me. And they're going to have to arrest me in the next month. I've positioned myself where it's either the judge gets arrested or I get arrested, and there is no middle ground here, because I am determined to make a stance no matter what. And I'll tell you a little bit more about the last part. So that's the case with Miss 7. My 3rd part, and how much time have we gone on for now? If we get this part done, and then we'll break at part 3.
You've plenty of time. We're only on 45 minutes.
Okay, I'll just if you just don't mind, I'll just have a sip.
Sorry, we can edit that out.
We can put some whiskey in for you and edit.
So back to this this photograph and these characters that none of whom I knew before I got kicked out of the police, and didn't know for a year until then. Now I want to talk now about the middle character, John Anthony Hill. Who knows him? Put their hands up who's heard of him. So only, and that surprised me, only 2 people. Well, Moad Dean, he goes by the name, was John Anthony Hill, was born on the 22nd of April 1948 in Sheffield. And he's the filmmaker of the 7/7 Ripple Effect series, Ripple Effect 1 and Ripple Effect 2, 7/7 Nazi Banksters. And he's an extremely interesting character indeed. And I want to share a little bit about his story, because I think it brings us right back to where we are tonight in the city centre of Sheffield. So, Moad Dean went to prison for 157 days to coincide with Lady Justice Hallett's inquiry on the 7/7 bombings in 2010 and 11. Why did he get sent to prison? Well, in a nutshell, he sent, as a friend of the court, to the clerk of the court, copies of his DVD video, The Ripple Effect, in a Kingston trial where 3 so-called corroborators of the 4 blamed Muslim bombers were being tried.